In the rainy early morning of August 29, 1987, a total of 31 bodies were found piled on top of each other in a factory ceiling in Yongin, South Korea. An additional body of a man was found hanging from the rafters. Was this self-inflicted or was there a third party involved? What then followed was an extensive investigation to find out what killed them. This is the case of Park Soon-ja and Five Oceans. Hello everybody, how's everyone doing? I hope that everyone is doing well. My name is Kia. Welcome to the channel. So with today's case, I don't know if my camera is picking this up, but my eyes are so red right now, and that is because it's really late. It is, what time is it now? It is 1:58 a.m. It's 2 a.m. and I'm filming this video. Child, bear with me, but if my eyes are red, there's nothing I can do about it, child. But we're gonna get into this video. Listen, I must say, today's case had me hoodwinked. It had me bamboozled. Just because when I thought I had an idea of where this case is going, sharp kill, I've always wanted to say that. But yeah, on a serious note though, this case had me on my toes and we are going to get right into it, okay? And as I'll be telling this today's story, I'll be applying my makeup, and if you are interested into the products that I'll be using, I've introduced them in a previous video which I will link here, I don't know, and also in the description box, so you can check that out. But I'll also leave a list of all of the products in the description box down below. I think it's worth mentioning that I couldn't find anything about the perpetrator in today's story. When I say that I looked up and down, I searched everywhere to find any kind of information about this woman. I couldn't find anything because I was looking for even like her date of birth, who her parents were, if she had any siblings, how many siblings, what her home life was like, with what school she went to, what kind of student she was. All of the like this little information that, you know, cases like this, we like to find out that kind of information, but I couldn't find anything at all. And this is also no small case either. It was widely published when everything happened back in the 80s, and still today people still know about this case, but I couldn't find any information about like her personally before all of the events that then happened that made her popular and this case popular. But what we do know and well published is that in 1978 she was diagnosed with stage 4 diaphragm cancer, and this was quite serious. Doctors couldn't really do much for her, and like the family was, you know, getting ready for the worst pretty much. And whether she wanted to right her ways with the Lord because she knew that her time had come, was pretty much coming to an end, or whether she was going to church to pray for a miracle, she just started attending church at this point. And I'm just going to go on a whim here and assume that she wasn't quite a religious person before she started getting sick. So yeah, she started really attending church. Her church was like her thing at this point, and miraculously she recovered. I know, I hate to be this person. I wish there was like a little bit more that I could be giving you, but when I say I couldn't find anything about her at all, I couldn't. So yeah, she recovered. That's it. And the way like all of this happened, like her recovery, it truly was a miracle for her. And she was like, there is no way this could have happened. God himself had to be involved in my recovery. And she became a devout Christian, and she started attending the Christian Baptist church, and she was a devout member. She was like one of those that, no, when I say that, I make it sound like it's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, one of those. And she was like a very hands-on church member. She was involved in all of the activities and all of the events that their church had. And they just knew that they could always count on her for anything. Like, she was really that hands-on. She was like that type, you know. She came early, she'd sit in front, she helped church members and stuff. Like, that was her thing. That was what she did. Okay, enough about the church. Move on to something else. So over time, with her eloquence and her social skills, she was able to gather a group of like-minded individuals in this church. This group advocated for the doomsday of time and named themselves Five Oceans. Five Oceans because Park Soon-ja, being the leader of this group, she told the group that when she got healed, she got close with God, you know, and God had told her that when the time comes, the doomsday scenario, when it comes, she is going to be the ruler of the world and the five oceans. So hence five oceans. It doesn't get any more cult like than a doomsday scenario, does it? That's like the number one rule in a cult. The end of the world is nigh. Anyway, Park Soon-ja was also a successful entrepreneur who owned a craft company that was called, you guessed it, Five Oceans. They were considered an exemplary company in the Daejeon area, and they received a presidential award at the national competition. Park Soon-ja did a lot of charity work, and she helped the poor and the disadvantaged in her area, especially the orphans who she had actually taken in, and she was providing care for them. She also treated her workers like family and had offered for them to live within the company premises, which, wow, woman, okay. And obviously people took her up on this, and they actually were people, most of her workers actually were living in the company premises. Her employees could also bring their children with them to work because Park Soon-ja offered daycare for her workers' children. Forgive me, I needed to figure out what I was doing. It's not perfect, but it's fine. I'm going to wipe it anyway and then go to bed. Anyway, where was I? I told you that she was married, and she didn't marry just anybody. Her husband, Lee Jin-jong, was the director of the construction bureau in Cheonam-do. Said that right. Cheonam-do. So that position in itself gave him a lot of power and a lot of respect in the area. So by virtue of being his wife, Park Soon-ja also benefits from this respect and trust from the people, especially when she started to ask for private loans from her workers and her followers to invest. So how this worked was her employees and followers would go to their family members and ask for money that they will then in turn give it to Park Soon-ja, who will then take this money to invest. The hook though was the 40% interest rate. 40%. Quick math. If you gave Park Soon-ja $10, I'm using dollars because that's like the universal currency. If you gave her $10, she will then in turn give you $14. If you gave her $10,000, she will then in turn give you $14,000. $100,000, $140,000. You get it, right? So it comes as no surprise at all that where the girlies were lining up. Everyone was saying, girl, you can have my check, where do I sign? Some people were even giving her their entire life savings. And I'm not joking about this. Like, that whole life savings, they would take all of that money and give it to her. Like, no matter what happens, no matter how good something sounds, never, ever, ever, ever give away your entire life savings. When it comes to things like this, give away money that you are willing to lose. I mean, there really isn't like mine I'm willing to lose, but like, you can't be giving someone your entire life savings is all I'm trying to say. Anyway, they did. They gave her their entire life savings because they knew that when payday comes, they'll be sorted for life. And also for context here, other companies at the time were paying 20% interest rate. So if there's someone else paying double, it only makes sense that people were lining up there, you know. And also to top it all off, something that she also did to stand out was that she gave the interest rate beforehand. Like, as you gave her the money, she'll then give you the interest rate then, and then the rest will then follow after. And she also gave you like a promissory note. It really was just that, a promissory note, which just entailed that yes, you gave away this money, this is how much you're going to be getting back, and with a stamp and a signature of hers. Yeah. And honestly, if that sounds too good to be true, it's because it is. I mean, come on, let's be honest. 40%, let's be real. What do you think this is, monopoly money? Over time, this also proved to be very unsustainable. I mean, obviously, I guess she didn't see it that way when she first started, but yeah, over time it did prove to be very unsustainable. And people were coming for her wanting their money, and she wasn't able to give them back their money. And one thing you don't play around is people's money. Play around with other things, not people's money. So when these people, the creditors, when the creditors will then come to her for their money back, she would send her followers to go and beat them up instead. Like this woman, she would then send her followers to go and beat them up. And what followed after the beating was a waiver for them to sign. And one of the creditors was this older couple who they didn't even know that they were creditors. So what had happened was, I can't remember if it was their daughter or their granddaughter who had taken money out and then given this money to Park Sunja for her to invest. So when they found out about this, they then not confronted her really, they just went to her to demand the money back because it wasn't hers to start to begin with. But when they got there, she did as she always did with the other creditors. They were beaten up and given a waiver to sign. And this is like an older couple. They're like in their late 60s, early 70s at most. The dog has just been crazy outside. I hope the mic isn't picking it up. After this, the elderly couple then went straight to the police station to report the entire ordeal, as they should. When something like this happens, you go to the police station. And that is when Five Oceans got onto the police radar and what have been doing. It really wasn't illegal what they were doing. It's just that she wasn't paying people their money back. So that's when the police had to get involved. So she was then called to the police station for questioning. And she actually did go to the police station. She was accompanied by her son, who was 24 at the time. And she was in her late 40s, yes. But still in there, she wasn't responsive. She wasn't responding to the detectives' questions. Like at this point, you might as well not come at all because she's not helping at all. But then somehow reporters got hold of this and they rushed to the police station. When they got to the police station to question her about these allegations, Miss Mamas fainted. She just passed out. I'm just going to presume it is out of embarrassment because she is not camera shy. That is one thing that we know for sure because she has had media coverage talking about the orphans and all of the good work that she's doing. So her passing out, it's safe to say that she was embarrassed. Anyway, after this, she was then taken to the nearest hospital, which was called St. Mary, and she stayed there overnight. But the following day, when her doctor went into her room to check up on her, she was nowhere to be found. The police were then notified of this and they went to her company to check up on her. But when they got there, her employees or her workers, I've been saying workers this time. Yeah, anyway, employees, workers is the same thing. So her employees told the investigators that she had actually left that very morning. They said that she had taken her children, some of the orphans and some of the workers, and they had all left. No one knew where they had gone, how long they'll be gone, if ever they're going to be back. No one knew anything. They just know that she just upped and left. So on August 25, 1987, she was considered to be on the run. Also, they didn't know where the 10 billion won that she owed people, where all of that money was. Police were dispatched to go and look for her, but they were only able to find 49 children that were in a an abandoned farm. Was it abandoned? It was a farm. I don't know if it was abandoned or not. They were found in a farm, but they still didn't know where Park Soon-ja and the other adults were. On August 28th, 3 days after the disappearance, the detectives got an anonymous call about the whereabouts of Park Soon-ja and the rest of the group. They were told that they were hiding in Samingdong-yongin, which is about an hour and a half drive from Daejeon. Their investigation led them to a factory at the base of a mountain, and when they got there, it was as silent as a mouse. There was no movement, nothing at all. It's like it was just dead in there, you know. But as this investigator looked around, there was just this. As he got to the van, he noticed that it was empty and it was locked, right? But then he was able to like peep inside the windows, and he saw like a ticket by the driver's seat that had Daejeon to Yongin. So this was proof to him that whoever the owner of this car was had been to Daejeon. So they just might be on the right track. He then gets into this factory, and honestly, this is the part that gets me, okay? Let me finish this and I'll tell you. So this investigator says that he then walks into the factory, and inside the factory there's nothing. He's looking around trying to see like anything at all that could give him like a clue or like to help into this entire investigation. He looks around, he sees nothing at all, and then as he's looking around, he's just like, he looks at the ceiling, and he says that he sees a pair of eyes in the ceiling, like something or someone is in the ceiling looking down at him. Oh my god, it's late. I'm like freaking myself out right now. And then he says he then turns and he just leaves. He's just like go on like he didn't see anything. I was like, surely there must be like translation was lost somewhere in here, because this guy cannot be really saying this. Anyway, this is what he says. I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe he's an investigator. He's probably seen worse. But I could only imagine me being in that situation. Like I walk into an abandoned factory. I don't think it was abandoned at the time, but like it's building. It's really quiet. And then you look up and then what you see is a pair of eyes, and then you just ignore it like it's nothing and then go on. If it was me, I would have probably thought like Matulwa or like some other worldly being or something like that, because there is no way I'm looking up, I'm seeing a pair of eyes and just walk away. I mean, I know like I'm so stuck into this whole thing, like it really doesn't matter at the end of the day, but like really my brain couldn't get over this. It couldn't. Anyway, but what we can all agree is if he had done something at all, whatever happened then, it wouldn't have happened. We probably wouldn't even have this case. I probably wouldn't be sitting here at 3 a.m. filming this case, talking about this case. Okay, I'm not like I'm blaming him or anything, I'm just saying, because the very next day, on the 29th of August 1987, the police are called to the very same factory that this investigator or detective had been at, and there was a chilling murder scene. In that very same ceiling, a total of 32 bodies. They all had cotton wool stuffed in their mouth and their noses, and they all had their hands and feet loosely tied together. There was a total of 4 men and 28 women. Of the 4 men, one of them was hanging from the rafters, while there were 2 piles of dead bodies, which investigators named Group A and Group B. Group A comprised of Park Soon-ja, had 3 children, and also 9 other people, making a total of 12 people in this pile, and the other group had 19 people. Man, I get lost between saying people and like bodies. I don't know, like I probably should just say bodies, but then there were people, you know. Anyway, so initially investigators thought that the cotton wool found in the mouth and the nose had been doused in like toxic chemicals, and that is what killed them. But when they took these cotton wools to the lab to be tested, they all came negative for toxic chemicals. And then when an autopsy was done on the bodies, it was clear that they all died by strangulation. Like they didn't do this to themselves. And the hanging man was later identified as the factory's manager. And they concluded that he had unalived himself by hanging. For the women, a vaginal examination was performed on all of them. And they found traces of semen in 12 of the 28 women, including Park Soo-ja herself. And they also found that they had had intercourse within a window of 2 to 3 days to the day that the bodies were found. Consensual, or was it not consensual? Nobody knows. But there were reports that they had been living in that ceiling for 4 days since the disappearance. And if the sexual intercourse happened in the ceiling, that will be extremely disturbing, because then Park Soon-ja's children would have seen her do this. Like, oh, her children were grown, and no child wants to see their parents get down with it, forced or otherwise. And also the investigators looked at this at the angle of there were 4 men in that ceiling and 28 women. So if there were 4, that'll probably be more unlikely, because 4 men, 12 women, the math is not mathing. And if that is the case, what were the others doing while this was happening? They could have stood up and tried to help them, something. So with cases like this, people always want to try to make sense of the why, what could have happened, and things like that. There was a rumor that the press actually ran with it and printed that Park Soon-ja had accumulated a lot of debt while running the craft work company and also the daycare and supporting all of the orphans. She had run into debt while doing that, and because she couldn't pay back the debt, she ended up killing 31 of her employees and also killed herself, which of course it doesn't make sense. People just like spewing nonsense. The police, on the other hand, were saying that she and her blind followers had committed mass, I can't say this word on YouTube, but mass, allegedly driven by religious fanaticism, which I get to a point, because you guys, the 80s was the Wild West. The 80s was like, if you wanted to have a cult, this is your moment, because there were so many cults then that a lot of them would end up in mass, a lot of people unaliving themselves. So I guess people just get excited over things like this. So I can get it to a point. Just take that Jonestown massacre case and already So I think it kind of makes sense for me why they would want to run with that. Anyway, the case was then closed, with investigators believing that the factory's manager, his name was Lee Jung-soo, he had strangled everyone under Park Soon-ja's orders, and then he unalived himself after the fact. Case closed. That was it. The case was then reopened in 1988 by the Special Committee to Investigate Corruption. They said that the case had to be reopened and reinvestigated by fresh eyes, because the first investigators, no thank you, we are done with you. We need new people on this. So right off the bat, the lead investigator said, no, not unlikely, highly unlikely. Mass murder on the, I don't know, I did that. Mass murder on the other hand, very likely. So with the initial investigation, they had concluded that Lee Jin-soo had strangled everybody and then hanged himself under Park Soon-ja's orders. First of all, they couldn't find any link between Mr. Lee and Park Soon-ja. If he was a follower or anything, why would he be compelled to follow her orders to do all of this thing? So they had to rule that out. And also, when you looked at his ligature marks, they didn't make sense. I'm about to get graphic and I hope that's okay. So his ligature marks goes, I don't want to use my neck. They go like this. They go like this from front to back. And that is consistent with someone being strangled from the back with a rope. And when someone dies from hanging themselves, their ligature marks will form a V shape around the neck. Okay? Which was not the case with Mr. Lee. So you get it. And also, like, how his body was found hanging, it didn't make sense at all. And I feel like I'm the only person touching on this because I couldn't find it in any of the extra research that I had to do for this case. No one was talking about this. Maybe someone will correct me in the comment section, but he was hanging but kneeling. When someone is hanging, gravity pulls the body down, the rope keeps the body in place, and that is how pressure is applied. And oh my god, why are my ears ringing? Maybe I shouldn't be talking about this. Maybe I shouldn't be talking about it. Moving on. So with that being said, every single one of them was strangled because they were all bearing the same circular mark around the neck. And also, this is the part where the second, I'm pretty much telling you, like, okay, the first investigation said this, and then the second investigation comes in and like disputes. It's disputing the right word for this. You remember how the first investigation closed with them saying that Mr. Lee strangled everyone? Well, if this were true, it would have taken him months. If you didn't know, strangling someone to death is a very long and strenuous process. I googled this and Google told me that it takes about 4 to 5 minutes for someone to die of strangulation. Also, if this was in fact true, if in fact he did do this, he should have had marks on his hands from the constant friction of pulling the rope around so many necks for that extended period of time. Didn't have any marks. His hands were actually really clean. There was nothing at all to prove this. How this case was even closed in the first place is beyond me, honestly. So with the second investigation, they were also saying that it is very difficult to say that they all killed each other, and it is more logical to consider a third party being involved in this. And if that was the case, then it would have taken at least a minimum of 6 people and about 10 hours to do all of this. But when they took a closer look at Park Soon-ja, they found lacerations around her mouth and also around her neck, which to investigators proved that she had fought back. Furthermore, into the autopsy, they found a hemorrhage under her skull. That kind of hemorrhage and the size of it is consistent with someone being hit really hard with either a club or a bat, or like their head being hit against the wall. Because I'm just thinking, because she resisted so much, so the person who was doing this probably just, hit her with something or against the wall just to make the process easier for them. So with all of the points that I've raised, it is very clear at this point that this wasn't self-inflicted. Someone else was involved in all of this. So it begs the question who it was, who would stand to gain the most out of doing this, why would they be doing this, and how, the most important question, how did they kill all 32 people? So the first theory that the investigators looked at was the bodies being killed at a different location and then transported back to the factory where they were kept to be found the following day. This is because there was an eyewitness account of someone saying that they saw a van come into the factory on 2 different occasions. Now, the thing with this theory is it's not completely improbable. It's just that when the bodies were moved out of the ceiling by the investigators, it took 7 police officers to carry the bodies out of the factory. okay, out of the ceiling. So 4 people were the ones that were carrying the body, giving it to the other 3 police officers that were receiving the body. Rookie mistake, I was doing my makeup and I didn't even realize that I hadn't switched on my mic. So what really shed a lot of light into this case was the pieces of paper found at the crime scene. There were actually 2 pieces of paper, but let's get into the first one. The first one was torn little piece of paper that had been scattered at this crime scene. And when investigators took these papers and put them together, the note read, and I quote, "Keep your mouth shut. She's already unconscious. 5 people have died in 4 hours. Just stay quiet. I planned this out. Endure it with his guidance, and I think everyone will die today." So this in itself shows that the note was written while the murdering was taking place, which how people do certain things will forever be beyond me. And also it raises 2 questions. 1, who was it addressed to? And 2, who is this man that is being referred to for guidance? We don't know. But what we do know is investigators actually confirmed that Park Soon-jae's husband, he was at the scene of the crime on August 29th from 1 a.m. to 8 a.m. You always gotta look at the husbands. It is always the spouse, isn't it? And I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but Park Soon-jae's husband is actually the one that discovered the crime scene. Can you imagine? He was the one that actually called the police to the crime scene. That must have been the worst. That must have been the absolute worst. So he was then brought in for questioning, and all he had to say was that he didn't know anything. He didn't know what to tell them. Like, this guy, honestly, his entire family had just died. And I just felt like he was not really helping investigators in trying to solve who could have killed his family, why they could have killed his family. I just felt like he wasn't helping at all. Like, yeah, he had just lost his entire family. He's grieving, valid. But Mr. Man, what were you doing at the scene of the crime at those hours of the night? He can at least answer that. What was he doing? Were you responsible? And they also asked him about his wife's loan business, and he said that he didn't really know about the business, which of course he's lying. His wife and all of their children were, like, the 3 of them, I'm saying all, like they had like 12 children. Okay, not funny. His wife and their children were involved in the business. How did he not know about this? Of course he knew about it. And also what he was doing at the factory, how he got to the factory. He didn't say anything. I couldn't for the life of me find this information because I also wanted to know, how did you get to the factory? Because mind you, it's an 1.5-hour drive from Daejeon to Yonggwang where the bodies were found. So for him to be there from 1 a.m. to 8 a.m., he must have known something for him to go there. That's for sure. But he didn't help the investigators at all. And also, I have a bone to pick with investigators because this man is definitely lying. He knows a lot more than he is letting on. And I feel because he was grieving, which valid, he was grieving, they just let him go. I honestly think that if he knew something, which he did, and just a little tiny bit more of pressure, I think that he would have cracked. He's vulnerable, he's emotional. It doesn't really take much. That's just my opinion anyway. So with Park Soon-jae's husband, as tight-lipped as he was, the investigators had to turn to another person who was, credible to try to find information of what could have happened and also trace the money, like where is the money. So their next best bet was the factory's manager. His name was Ru Sang-ho. He was responsible for keeping track of the borrowed money and where it was going. And if there was one person who would have cracked open this case, it would have been him. But he was missing. He just vanished and no one knew where he was. The reporters even reached out to his mother, who went on TV to plead with him to show up to help with this investigation. But years went by until 1991 or 1990, when 6 men just turned themselves up unprovoked, which is very suspicious because no one was suspecting them as far as investigators knew about this case. No one was suspecting them, and they just randomly turned up and confessed to his disappearance. At this point, no one knew that he was even dead. As far as they know, he had just disappeared. He could have run out of the country or something to save himself, but they turned up and said that he was actually dead and they were responsible for his murder. They also wanted to make something very clear that they were not responsible for the death in Yonging. That they were not responsible for. All they did was kill Ro Sang-ho. The reason they did this is they said is because he had been aware of this impending doom that was coming down on Five Oceans, right? And he had planned on leaving the company and running away. So to keep him from talking, they killed him. Now, the thing that they said that didn't make sense is, and they were also coached by the police for this. I don't know why. But what they did say was they were not part of Five Oceans, they were part of Salvation Sect. Which, what does Salvation Sect benefit from killing an employee of Five Oceans? It really doesn't make sense, or doesn't it? Hold that thought. Remember the second note that I told you earlier? I told you that there were 2 notes found at the crime scene. The first one was the tattered pieces that were put together, and the second one was small and it was intact. And this note said, and I'll quote, "Samu is now suffering too." That is all the note had to say. So who is Samu? As such, at Five Oceans revealed numerous business cards to Samu Trading Co. Five Oceans was registered under Samu Trading Company, and a man by the name Yu Bin was the owner of this company. So we're just going to call him Mr. Yu, okay? Yu. Okay, so quick story about Mr. Yu. Mr. Yu had a church. This church was called the Evangelical Baptist Church of Korea. Followers of this church called him the Messiah. They called him Jesus. He is not the first person to come out of South Korea. Not even just Korea, like in the world really, where followers would call him the Messiah. So he was one of those, okay? And he felt like he needed like a solid foundation in society and things, and he wanted to start a company. But the money that he got from his followers was not enough to sustain him. That is why he wanted a company as well. So he took over Samu Trading Company, which was on the verge of bankruptcy. And then he appointed his followers in major cities to collect money for him from the congregation in those areas. And this was in the major cities like Gwangju, Daegu, Busan, and Daejeon. So Park Soon-ja was responsible for the collection of the private loans in Daejeon. So it turns out she was not the mastermind after all. She was just a pawn in this grand scheme of schemes. In this grand scheme of like money laundering, fraud, whatever this is. So you had Park Soon-ja, you had Mr. Yu, and right in the middle you had Song Jae-hwa, and she was such a faithful assistant to Mr. Yu. So what happened is Park Soon-ja will collect the money in the Daejeon area from her followers and all of these people, and then give this money to Song Jae-hwa. Song Jae-hwa will then in turn give this money to Mr. Yu. You see? But when the case broke, Mr. Yu blamed everything on Song Jae-hwa, and he denied any knowledge about any money collection. But a deep investigation investigation was done into the company's Five Oceans and Samu, and investigators found multiple documents of sending and receiving money between these two companies. So a total of 460 million won was found to have been transferred between the two. And also with the promissory notes, remember the promissory notes, some of them were signed by Park Soon-ja, while some of them were signed by Mr. Yu himself. The exchanged money was acknowledged in court, but what for exactly, that died with Park. So what is believed to have happened is that when Park realized that Samu wasn't going to help her repay back the money to the creditors, she and some of her followers literally ran for the hills. Literally, they were at the foot of a mountain. But the court didn't have any evidence to tie him to the mass murders, so he was only charged with fraud and sentenced to 4 years in prison. Oh, I forgot to say this, that like led to him being arrested. That helped in him being arrested. So a former member of his church came forward and said that he called the money he received from his congregation, what is this, offerings? I think it's called offerings. He called it development expenses, and also the money that he received from Park Soon-ja and these other people, he also called it development expenses. Now, the little note that was torn up that was found at the scene, it read, and I quote, "I disagree, I completely object. If you pass it on, the development expenses will increase. Keep quiet, keep your mouth shut." So with him calling the development expenses here on the note, and also other people acknowledging that he called all of this money's development expenses, it kind of like really tied him to all of this. So Mr. Yu served his sentence and he was involved in yet another scandal. This man, scandalous. So on April 16, 2004, he was involved in the Sewol ferry disaster whereby 299 people died. I think it was school kids, if I do remember well. 299 of them died. And then later in 2014, his body was found on top of a hill and no one knew how he died, what could have caused his death, if he was killed. No one was ever arrested for this. And the case of Five Oceans still closes, with investigators thinking that because she ran away, it was still, which I don't know how it was. I personally don't think it was. I have my own little theory that Samu could possibly have been involved in trying to shut them up so that the money is not tied to him, because if then people found out that the money was actually tied to him, then he will be forced to pay back the money. I just think that makes a lot more sense. I don't see how it could have been that they did this to themselves. But that is just my own 2 cents on this. So also when you factor in that Mr. Yu was the leader of Salvation Sect and Evangelical Baptist Church is the same thing. When you consider that, and the 6 men that had come forward saying that they murdered the factory manager, remember those ones? I think it all makes sense. I think that actually happened. But I think that Park Soon-ja first reached out to him like, yo, I need money. These people are on my tail. I need to pay them back. And when she realized that he's not going to pay, she then had to run because, I mean, maybe she felt like she was not safe where she was. That was why she ran. Maybe she'll think of a better plan while she was still on the run or something. And then I feel like when she was there, she reached out to him yet again to see if he was willing to cooperate and work with her so that they can find a way to pay back the money, hence the notes, I think. And also I feel like the 6 men, they killed the factory manager, Su something, I forget his name, and then after that they went to Yunging to kill the other 32 people in there. The other factory manager in there, I don't know how he got involved. Maybe he witnessed something he wasn't supposed to see and they didn't want to leave a witness behind. I don't know about him. But I think like with them being murdered, I think it just makes sense. I think it does, instead of like this whole murder thing. Anyway, I'm tired. I'm rambling at this point. I need to sleep. My eyes are still very much red. So you can also leave your theories in the comment section. I'll be very much interested into hearing what you have to say. What do you think happened? Don't say it's they unalived themselves, because I don't think that makes sense. I don't think that makes sense. I think Mr. Yu was involved from start to finish. So if you want to see more videos like this, please make sure to like, to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. I am done. I'm tired. I'm just going to take this off and sleep. Oh, I love you. Bye bye. Oh.